Thanksgiving had always been complicated in our family, but that year it felt different the moment I walked into my mother-in-law's dining room. The table was long and crowded, set with polished plates that reflected the chandelier above, every place card written in her neat, controlled handwriting. I found my name at the far end, away from my husband, tucked between two folding chairs like an afterthought. Before I could even sit, she appeared behind me with a bright smile that never reached her eyes and slid something onto my place setting. It wasn't porcelain like everyone else's. It was a plastic plate, pale blue, decorated with cartoon animals, and a tiny divider for vegetables, the kind meant for toddlers who spill more than they eat. No one laughed, but I felt the air shift. Her daughters pretended not to notice, and her sisters suddenly found the gravy boat fascinating. My husband froze, halfway through pulling out his chair, as if he'd misheard what the room was saying. I wanted to believe it was a mistake, that she had simply grabbed the wrong thing in the chaos of cooking for a dozen people, but I knew her too well. Every small humiliation was calculated, wrapped in politeness so that calling it out would make me seem dramatic. She had never forgiven me for not coming for money, for needing help when we first married, for being someone she couldn't control. As I sat down with that toy plate in front of me, I could feel the old familiar heat rising behind my eyes, the mixture of shame and anger I had swallowed for years. Memories flooded in of past holidays where she commented on my weight, my job, the way I raised my kids, always just softly enough that others could pretend not to hear. This time, though, something inside me settled instead of breaking. I had spent the entire drive rehearsing how to survive another dinner, how to smile and nod until dessert was served. But the sight of that childish plate made it clear that survival wasn't enough anymore. I slipped my hand into my bag under the table and touched the envelope I'd carried with me all day, the one I had almost left behind because I was afraid of what it would change. I had found it weeks earlier by accident, tucked between old tax papers my husband had asked me to organize, and it had rewritten everything I thought I knew about our family. I hadn't planned to do anything with it today. I told myself I would wait, that I would choose a quieter moment, but as my mother-in-law lifted her glass and began her speech about gratitude and respect, I realized there would never be a perfect time. I looked down at the cartoon giraffe smiling up at me from my plate, felt the weight of that envelope against my fingers, and understood that this was the last Thanksgiving where I would swallow the insult and stay silent. I forced myself to eat from that plastic plate like it was the most normal thing in the world, letting the mashed potatoes slide into the little molded corner meant for peas, letting her watch me perform the humiliation she had designed. Inside, though, I was cataloging everything the way I had learned to do when I stopped trusting appearances. The way she avoided my eyes while bragging about family loyalty. The way she kept glancing at my bag, as if some instinct told her the balance of the room was shifting. The way her son, my husband, stayed quiet, caught between the woman who raised him and the woman who had built a life with him. Weeks earlier, I had been cleaning the hall closet when I found the envelope. It wasn't sealed, just wedged inside a file folder with our names typed neatly on the tab, the kind of organization that only she ever used. Inside were copies of bank statements I had never seen before, statements from an account that wasn't in my name but had my signature on the authorization line. It took me a long moment to realize why the handwriting looked familiar. She had signed it for me. The dates lined up with the year we were barely making rent, the year she insisted on helping by handling some of our paperwork because she said stress wasn't good for me. I had been grateful then. Now I saw the truth sitting in black and white. That account was the reason my credit had quietly collapsed without explanation, the reason loan applications disappeared into silence and interest rates climbed higher every year. She had opened it in my name, run charges through it for her own renovations and trips, then let it rot until it became my problem. I remember standing in that hallway with the envelope in my hands, feeling like I had stepped into a different life, one where kindness was just another tool to keep me small. At the table, she kept performing the role of gracious host, refilling glasses, telling stories about how hard it was to hold a family together when people didn't know their place. I watched her mouth move and felt the words slide off me. For once, I wasn't trying to decode her. I already knew the story behind the smile. Every time she leaned over my shoulder to pass a dish to someone else, I felt the paper in my bag rustle softly, a private reminder that the power in the room had changed hands. Halfway through dinner, she brought out a stack of old photo albums and began flipping through them, narrating decades of memories that never seemed to include me. I realized she was doing what she always did when she felt threatened, building a wall of nostalgia so thick no one could see the cracks. But I had stopped caring about the wall. I had stopped caring about the role she had written for me as the quiet daughter-in-law who should be grateful for scraps. By the time dessert was served, my hands were steady. The fear that had kept me silent for years had burned down into something clean and focused. I didn't know exactly how this would end, only that I was done pretending. The envelope felt heavier now, not because it weighed more, but because it carried the truth she had buried. And as she finally met my eyes with that familiar, dismissive tilt of her head, I understood that the moment I had dreaded was no longer something to avoid. It was something I was ready to claim. When everyone was distracted by pie plates and coffee refills, I finally pulled the envelope from my bag and laid it flat on the table in front of me. I didn't raise my voice or make a scene. I simply slid the papers out where the light could reach them, the way you do when you want the truth to speak for itself. The room quieted in small pieces, conversations fading as people noticed my calm, noticed her stiffening posture across from me. Her face lost its practiced warmth when she recognized the account number. When she saw the signature, she thought no one would ever compare. For a second, she looked old instead of powerful, like someone caught inside a story that had just turned against her. I felt strangely gentle in that moment, not because I pitied her, but because I no longer needed her to be anything at all. I let the silence stretch until it was uncomfortable, until the weight of it pressed against every person at that table. Then I stood up, picked up my childish plate, and walked it to the trash. The sound it made when it dropped was soft, almost nothing, but it echoed louder in my chest than any argument ever had. I didn't stay to watch her scramble for excuses or for allies. I kissed my husband on the cheek, told him I loved him, and walked out into the cold evening air feeling lighter than I had in years. I had come to that house prepared to endure another holiday of small cuts. I left knowing I had finally ended the story she'd been writing for me,